Chapter 4. For better, for worse. My body jerked itself awake, and I gasped intensely. Snow was by my side in an instant, holding me down. "Don't sit up," she warned. "Stay down. You're safe. We're safe." I blinked my eyes and tried to breathe slowly and deeply, realizing soon enough that if I didn't, I'd end up facing another attack. Only a moment later did I realize that I wasn't lying in my bed at home, but on a small sofa. A familiar small sofa. I looked around. The room was dark, but there was light shining through the drawn blinds. "Henry?" I muttered. Then, as I turned to look for him and attempted to move my body, the pain suddenly smacked me across the face. "Oh, good grief!" I exclaimed, gritting my teeth and lying back down. My muscles burned as I tried to move, my legs and thighs especially. I groaned. "Are you all right?" I had never been happier to hear the familiar voice of my local friendly store clerk. I smiled through the pain as he walked over. "Hey," he said softly, frowning. "Hey," I whispered back. "I'm so glad you're still here." His frown deepened and he looked away, shame taking over his face. "I'm sorry," he breathed. "I'm so sorry. You shouldn't have been pushed so much. I thought you'd just give up and leave." Snow chuckled. "Give up, Saskia? That's absurd." I scoffed lightly in protest, but Snow was right. I prided myself on my determination and willpower, and though they often came at the expense of my body, without them I'd never even get through the challenges my health threw at me each day in the first place. He remained quiet, staring at the floor. "It's not your fault, Henry," I spoke softly. "It was my choice. I'm just glad it paid off." He glanced over at me. No doubt I looked horrible. I was suddenly a little too aware of my messy hair, probably tangled with leaves and twigs, and the dirt and the sand. Sand everywhere. I hoped the sofa wasn't too messy with whatever I had dragged in. "I hope you know it did," he breathed, snapping me out of my thoughts. I met his gaze. "I'd have left. That's protocol. If anybody gets even a little close to the truth, it's pack up everything and disappear without a trace." "Why?" I asked softly, and he sighed, turning away. "I cannot risk discovery. It would put 7 years' worth of effort in jeopardy, and that cannot happen." I knitted my eyebrows together, unsure. My head was spinning. "Henry?" He sighed softly and looked back at me. "I'm sorry, I don't know how much I can tell you. Seriously, this has never happened before, but I know one thing for sure." I tilted my head to the side, but didn't say anything. He looked down at me with eagerness and promised. He looked down at me with earnestness and promise. "That I don't want to lose our friendship, and I think that's worth the risk." I smiled softly and reached out with a trembling hand. He looked at it, a little confused, but then moved ever so slowly to hold it, glancing up at me to make sure it was okay. I simply nodded lightly, and he took my hand in his. "I'd just like some answers, Hen," I said softly. All of this seemed concerning on surface level, but I trust you, so think it over, and whenever you feel like talking, just let me know. He blinked, looking down at my hand, and then he glanced up at my face. "Huh?" he muttered, frozen for a second. "Sorry, Yeah, that sounds good." He sighed in relief. Thank you for your patience. That's more than I deserve." I shook my head, but regretted it immediately and flinched at the headache and the rush of blood it came with. "No," I said softly. I just want you in my life." He drew in a sharp, shuddered breath and turned away from me. He rubbed his free hand across his face, and for a moment I worried that I'd said something wrong. "Sus, He started, but his voice broke. It's been so long since anybody said that to me." Hearing that shattered my heart. "Henry," I whispered, and he lowered his head, his shoulders shaking. I'm sorry, he muttered. I'm so sorry. I didn't know what he was apologizing for. I tried to sit up, but pain seared through my muscles and Snow quickly advised me to stay down. I sighed softly, defeated. Gosh, I should have just texted you. I chuckled softly, hoping to break the tension. Henry chuckled a little despite everything. I don't think there was any cell reception. I smiled. You tried? He scratched the back of his neck and I chuckled awkwardly. Then I remembered something. Wait, the medals! I exclaimed. Don't worry, look. Henry pulled his phone out of his pocket. I noticed he was still in his Phantom Renegade attire, save the mask and hat and gloves, and found a news article. He showed me. The medals had been delivered to the World Medabot Federation, sorted through and meticulously documented. Pictures of every medal, along with their names and other relevant information, were plastered across the screen. I breathed out a sigh of relief. This way, all the medals were sure to be reunited with their owners sooner or later. I'm glad you stepped in earlier, Snow, Henry chuckled. It looks like a lot of work. I tilted my head. You'd have returned them? Henry nodded. Yeah, of course. It doesn't look like there were any rare ones in the collection. I hummed softly, in thought. The Phantom Renegade only grabbed them to taunt the rubber robos, he confessed with an awkward laugh, and I chuckled softly. Oh, really? He nodded. Yeah, though it's not right to leave those medals with them anyway. It's not fair on the bots and the children they stole them from, and that bunch doesn't need more firepower at their disposal. I thought back to last night. You can say that again. Though, at least they don't seem to be able to use their medabots properly. Are they that inexperienced? Henry nodded. Oh, yeah, they're idiots, but they're dangerous idiots. Those medabots were likely stolen. What did they use again? Did you get a good look? I was, busy. There was a Sigaru, a white sword, I muttered, trying to remember, and a Gokudo, and one more. A Gobanko. Snow filled in, and I remembered. Yeah, strange, honestly. I remember finding it odd how they just stood there, as though they didn't want to fight at all. If they were stolen. My face fell. I was filled with pity for the poor medabots, who had likely been ripped from their homes and medafighters and were now forced to fight. I feel bad for row-battling them now, I muttered, and Snow dipped her head down. We had no choice, she said. I sighed softly. Those poor things, I muttered. It all makes sense, that's why they didn't fight back. Can you imagine that? To be taken from your home and metafighter and forced into a row battle? Snow sighed softly, the idea a painful one. Henry stood up with a determined look on his face. Don't worry, we'll just steal them back, he promised. And then we can return them to their metafighters. I was pleasantly surprised. You really think you can do that? I asked. He grinned, confident. Put your trust in the Phantom Renegade. He isn't a master thief for nothing. I giggled softly. You know what? You're right. He is cool. Henry paused for a moment. Then his tear-stained face lit up. Yeah? You think so? He asked, and I couldn't help but smile and chuckle lightly. Yeah. Henry beamed. I didn't think I'd ever seen him that happy. It took me a while before I could sit up, but I was able to with the help of Snow. Then I remembered the stairs that led up to Henry's apartment, and I felt very tempted to lie right back down and just lay claim to his sofa for the next few days instead of attempting anything. What's wrong? He asked softly, and I gestured vaguely towards his door. Stairs, I groaned, and leaned back against the sofa. And I don't think I'll get far without the wheelchair. Henry shook his head quickly. It's okay, he exclaimed, and pointed towards a corner of the room. I took a closer look and realized my wheelchair was standing right there. Snow and I decided it was probably best to take you to my place, just in case anything was wrong and we didn't want to leave you by yourself. But I picked up the chair after, and if you're feeling good enough to go home... I sighed softly. You'll have to carry me down, I'm afraid, I admitted. My legs won't be of much use. Either that, or I'll have to impose on your hospitality for the next few days. He shook his head and frowned softly. Okay, first of all, none of that's a problem if you... His face got a little red as he stumbled over his words. Wanna stay here or have me carry you down? Yeah, but, do you really think it'll take that long to recover? I frowned softly and sighed. Yes, unfortunately. It'll be a while before I can walk again. Properly, at least. He crossed his arms and looked at me, his dark eyes brimming with compassion and concern. And what would you like the most? Just let me know what you want and we'll make it work. I smiled tenderly and tried sitting up a little more, flinching at the pain, but glad that he was there. Thank you. Henry ended up taking my wheelchair down first, and then, very carefully, he carried me down as well. He walked us home and made me promise I'd ask for his help if there was anything I needed. It had been a while since I'd felt that deeply cared for, though I supposed he felt a bit guilty and responsible for everything that happened. I hoped he wouldn't beat himself up over it. If anything, it was my own fault, but he wouldn't hear it. Snow cared for me the following days, preparing me food, helping me up and down the stairs whenever I absolutely had to, making sure I didn't do too much and guarding my boundaries with me. I felt beyond grateful for having her there. As the days passed, my pain got more bearable, and around the 4th day, I felt okay enough to pick up my daily routine in full again, and decided it was about time for Snow and I to visit the Hot Mart again. Looking for power, are you? I heard as Snow and I quietly entered the store Henry worked at. There's a ton of MEDABOTS to give you extra. Henry paused when he heard the door close, and upon seeing the two of us, he seemed to forget everything else and smiled brightly. Hey! He exclaimed and waved us over. He'd been talking to a certain young boy in a red shirt. Hey, Henry. Hey, Iggy, I said, as Snow rolled the wheelchair closer. Mind if we join you? Henry shook his head. Not at all, he exclaimed, and Iggy nodded in agreement. Yeah, it's good to see you. Kinda missed you. We were worried. Iggy confessed, and I smiled apologetically, though touched. Oh, I'm okay now, I promised, and Iggy nodded. Good. Snow and I had both noted the lack of a certain yellow hothead just as I opened my mouth, to ask about him, Snow did. Where's Medaby? Iggy sighed. That's the problem. There's a row battle tournament coming up, and I really want to participate, but he's just not listening to me. Snow glanced up at me, and without having to say a word, I knew what it was that she wanted. I knew that Snow would love nothing more than to participate, but neither of us knew if I'd be able to handle it. Regardless, it seemed a welcome distraction, and I gave her a small nod. I watched her light up, and couldn't help but feel my heart flutter. I loved her so deeply, and seeing her happy was all I could ever want. So, where do we sign up? I asked, and both Henry and Iggy's eyes widened in surprise. Huh? You're participating too? Iggy exclaimed, and I chuckled softly. Well, I'd like to, anyway. Henry grinned. I can help you sign up later. I smiled and nodded. Thanks, Hen. He looked away shyly and blushed a little, scratching the top of his head. Yeah, no prob. Iggy fidgeted, impatient. Okay, Henry, but you were saying about those MEDABOTS? Henry blinked and snapped back to the moment at hand. Huh? Oh, yeah, MEDABOTS. You need to give Medaby a tune-up. If you can't, you can get the best MEDABOTS in the world, but unless your MEDABOT is in tip-top shape, they're just gonna slow him down. Iggy frowned and shook his head. I can't remember the last time I so much as polished Medaby. Henry nodded. A row battle tournament is serious stuff. It pushes MEDABOTS to the absolute limit. If I were you, I'd take Medaby apart and give him a thorough clean-up. Iggy sighed in defeat. I agree, but I'd have to take his medal out, and he'd never let me do that. Every time I try, he goes ballistic. I glanced at Snow. It had been a long time since I'd been able to care for her properly, but we'd found ways around it. Snow knew how to clean and polish her own parts, and I'd help her with the areas she couldn't reach, and recently Henry had offered to do it for us. Snow, too, was unusually independent for a MEDABOT. She didn't like being outside of her body, at all, and I was pretty sure she preferred cleaning herself, as opposed to having someone else do it for her. Maybe we could teach Medaby as well. I know. What if you put his medal in a spare body? Would you go for that? Henry offered, and Iggy tilted his head to the side. I don't know. Henry grinned like he did whenever he thought he'd come up with something brilliant. Just a sec, he exclaimed, and rushed off to find something. There he goes, Snow muttered, watching as he left, and I giggled. Hey, Icky, it'll be fine, I'm sure, I reassured, and Icky smiled, relieved. Yeah, I hope so. Medaby's just so stubborn sometimes. Check it out, Henry exclaimed as he returned, holding a tin pet. It's almost brand new, but I don't mind lending it to you. Promise you'll take care of it? Icky lit up. What? Really? Wow! He exclaimed, and reached out for it. Henry pulled it away with a smirk. I don't know. Should I lend it to you? My heart says yes, but my wallet says no. I scoffed lightly and giggled under my breath, amused. Henry glanced over at me, and his smile widened a little. Icky, on the other hand, was just frozen in surprise. What? Henry chuckled and handed the tin pet over. Just kidding, you can borrow it. Icky grinned in relief and gladly took the tin pet. Just take care of it, okay? Henry added, a little more sternly, and Icky nodded vigorously. I promise, he exclaimed, then ran out the door, carrying the tin pet. Thanks, Henry. The door fell shut behind him. Henry chuckled softly and leaned back against the counter, shaking his head lightly. I smiled as well. Icky was a good kid, and Medabot a good Medabot. It was nice to be able to help them, even if I hadn't been able to do much this time. So, Sas, how are you doing? Henry asked and snapped me out of my thoughts. Feeling a bit better? I nodded and stretched my arms. Uh-huh. Yeah, it may take a little bit, but I always come back. Henry nodded slowly. Well, I'm glad to hear you're doing okay. And good enough to participate in a tournament. I smiled. Yes, it sounds like fun. When is it? This weekend, Henry said, pointing to a poster behind the counter. I leaned over to have a better look. The usual bi-monthly local tournament, nothing special, but a casual, low-stakes sparring match was exactly what I was looking for. Sounds good, I muttered as I pulled out my phone to register online. I scanned the QR code on the poster and followed the link to sign us up. You'll do great, Henry smiled after a moment of silence, and I couldn't help but chuckle a little. Thanks, Hen. I spoke softly, flashing him a quick smile before glancing down at Snow. She was more than ready. I could sense her anticipation. The days leading up to the tournament, Snow and I spent training and practicing our openings and going over our strategies in the front garden. We were always prepared for a row battle, but tournaments weren't just one row battle, rather a stretch of at least a couple different ones. We needed to play the long game, which wasn't one of our strengths. Snow was built for overwhelming her opponents quickly, generating a lot of power and energy and rapidly snowballing into an unstoppable force. Whilst it was a good strategy, it cost lots of energy, and that energy would be harder and harder to summon the more battles we fought. Unfortunately, the longer we'd last, the tougher the row battles would become. As I contemplated, Snow's attention was suddenly drawn by something across the street. She tugged on my sleeve, gently, and I looked down at her, then followed her gaze. I frowned. I furrowed my brow and raised my hand. Hey, Medabot, what are you doing here? I called. Everything okay? Medabot, who had been stomping along the sidewalk, looked over at us in confusion. He exclaimed. Oh, hi. I motioned for him to join us. What's the matter? Snow asked as he opened the gate and walked through. Medabot crossed his arms, fuming. Icky's trying to replace me, that's all. He's been pushing me, and now this? I said, you know what, I'm fine on my own. I don't need you, so I ran away. A frown took over my face, and I opened my mouth to say something, but Snow beat me to it. Do you have anywhere to stay? She asked. Medabot shook his head. Nope, stray dog over here, he said with a shrug. Come join us then, if only for a few days. Snow offered, though it sounded more like an order. Medabot shrugged. Sure, it's not like I've got anywhere else to go anyway. Snow nodded. Let's get inside then, she stated, and I didn't argue, as I'd been feeling drained from practicing and needed a break. In addition to that, I wasn't sure if I'd be able to convince Medabot to do anything else. We settled in the living room. Snow helped me sit down on the sofa, and then turned to Medabot. I looked at him as well. It was strange to see him in my house. And I felt awful for Icky, who was probably worried sick. What? Medaby huffed, and I smiled gently, hoping to disarm him a bit. Do you have Mrs. Tenrio's phone number? I asked softly, and Medaby tilted his head to the side. Oh, yeah, but what would you want that for? He eyed me suspiciously. You're not going to take me back, are you? To my surprise, Snow shook her head. Not unless you want to, she said. But they at least deserve to know where you are, because we don't want them to worry. Medaby crossed his arms and huffed. Yeah, you're probably right, he muttered, then gave me her phone number, much to my relief. I swallowed thickly as I typed the number into my phone and called Icky's mother and held my breath as I waited for her to pick up. Phone calls always gave me such anxiety. Hello? Chidori Tenryo speaking. Mrs. Tenryo's voice chimed through the phone. I took a deep breath. Hi, my name is Saskia. Icky might have mentioned me before. He hangs out at a store my best friend works at, so we cross paths sometimes, and I rambled on, but she cut me off. Oh, Saskia, yes, Icky's told me all about you and your Medabot. Snow, right? I'm afraid they'll never stop talking about you and your row battle. I was pleasantly surprised by the gentle and happy voice that greeted me. Yes, I said. Medaby is with us, in case you were worried about him. I could practically hear her smile through the phone. Oh, I'm sure he'll have a wonderful time. Are you teaching him any new tricks? I looked at Snow desperately for help with navigating this conversation, but she nodded encouragingly. Oh, sure, we can. There's a row battle tournament coming up, so... Oh, yes, that'll be wonderful. Well, please tell Medaby he can stay as long as he likes and to study well. I opened my mouth to say something else, but she hung up before I could. I breathed out a heavy sigh and leaned back against the sofa. Oh, I'm so bad at this, I groaned, and Snow gently placed a hand on my knee. You did very well, she said, and I smiled weakly. So, what's next? Medaby asked, and Snow and I turned to look at him. I chuckled apologetically. Honestly, I'm exhausted, and I need some time to recover from our training session this morning. Snow nodded. Let's get you to bed. A nap will do you good. I nodded and let her help me off the sofa. I wonder what Henry's up to, I muttered as she helped me climb the stairs. Medaby ran after us. Maybe we can give him a call later today, Snow suggested, and I nodded. Yeah, maybe I will. I was out of breath by the time we made it to the top of the stairs, but Snow made sure I took my time to recover and helped me into bed. She pulled the covers over me as Medaby watched from the doorway. After making sure I was comfortable, both Medabots made their way down the stairs again. So, Snow, Medaby asked, more quietly than usual. I've been meaning to ask for a while. What's wrong with Saskia? I mean, I know she's sick and she can't walk well, but... Snow shook her head. There's nothing wrong with her, but yeah, she is sick. Very sick. But it's the kind of sick you don't get better from. Medaby tilted his head to the side. What do you mean? Snow sighed softly. It's hard to explain. She's been through a lot of hardships in her life. A lot of pain. It's like that pain settled in her body. She has multiple chronic conditions ranging from widespread pain to extreme fatigue and lots of digestive problems and more. She's been left with just as many mental health issues. She's always so scared because, well, she's been hurt so much. Her mind and her body are always on the lookout for danger. Her system can't distinguish between what happened in the past and what is happening now. She's technically safe now, but she relives what happened to her every day. Medaby remained very quiet. Carefully, he listened to Snow and took in every word. Only after a moment did he ask his next question, and softly at that. And what happened to her? Snow shook her head. It's not my place to tell you that. If you really want to know, you'll have to ask her, but she doesn't like talking about it, I guess. All you need to know is that she's very fragile, but very strong too. She's still here, despite everything. Medaby nodded slowly, and Snow continued. I'd made it my mission to support her through everything and be there for her no matter what. I will always keep her safe. Nothing can come between us. It sure sounds like it, Medaby pondered, but before he could say anything about Icky, Snow pulled him along. Come on, I'm going to show you how to give yourself a tune-up. It won't be as good as when someone else does it, but you've been squeaking all over the place, so every little bit helps. Hey, what's that supposed to mean? Medaby exclaimed, and Snow chuckled. Come on, Mr. Hothead. Medaby clenched his hands to fists. I am not a hothead, he yelled. Shh, Snow hissed. Saskia's trying to sleep, but thanks for proving my point. Medaby grumbled, but sat down on the rug as Snow gathered a few tools. She showed him the screwdrivers, wrenches, oil cans, and more, and how to operate them. She demonstrated on her own arm, carefully unscrewing the pieces and cleaning the gears, wires, and circuit boards. Medaby's annoyance made place for curiosity, and he watched closely as Snow showed him how to do it. After only an hour or so, Medaby had the basics down, and Snow didn't have to do much more than speak an encouraging word here and there, as Medaby worked on his own parts one by one. In a little while, Snow just started working on herself instead, because Medaby was doing so well on his own. Snow had to admit that though the yellow bot had a knack for making things harder than they needed to be, he listened well if given the chance, and picked up on new skills fairly quickly. He was very bright. He just liked doing things his own way. Snow could relate. She didn't fit the stereotype of a perfectly obedient Medabot either, and she had been no more than a problem to her previous owner. Snow had once belonged to a man named Dr. Armand. She didn't remember much of him, because she hadn't been inside a Timpet for the vast majority of the time she'd been in his possession. He'd never row-battled with her. Instead, he would perform all sorts of tests and experiments. How long could her metal be submerged in water without corroding? How many electric shocks could she take without lashing out? Where did the line between taming and breaking her wild spirit lie? He never did find it. Once she had finally been put inside a Timpet, she had punched him in the face and ran as fast as she could. All these forgotten memories went unsaid as the two Medabots worked quietly on their parts, but Snow felt the atmosphere settle. Medaby seemed calmer now that his parts weren't giving him as much trouble. Snow couldn't help but think of me and how impatient and snappy I got when I had a bad pain day. Mostly towards myself, of course, because I wouldn't be caught dead hurting another person's feelings, or a Medabot's. Still, Snow knew well how pain, and physical discomfort in general, wore at one's patience. She hoped Medaby might feel a bit better soon. The day of the tournament approached much faster than I would have liked, and before I knew it, there were no more days to practice. I had wanted to do more, prepare more, strategize more, think more, but alas, there was no more time to do so. I bit the inside of my cheek as Snow pushed my wheelchair onwards. We'll be fine, she said, and I smiled softly. She didn't even need to see my face to know that I was nervous. I wondered briefly when we had gotten so tuned into one another, but as long as I could remember, I had always related to Snow. I had loved her the moment I found her discarded medal, and I loved her all the same as the early sun rays reflected off her plating many years later. My Medabot meant everything to me. But there was another set of Medaparts the sun caught that morning. Medaby walked beside us, and he was unusually quiet. He'd stayed with us and practiced alongside Snow and I the past couple days. Henry had come over a few times, and we'd discussed potential strategies, but it felt more than strange to tiptoe around the elephant in the room. Medaby still wanted to participate in the row battle tournament, but that meant he'd have to work alongside Icky. They hadn't seen each other in a while, and if Icky was as angry as Medaby was, then there was a good chance they would never reconcile. The unstoppable force of Icky's frustration and the immovable object of Medaby's stubbornness might prove irreconcilable. I frowned, my mind heavy with all the concerns it harbored. After a short stroll, we made it to the town square where the row battle tournament would be held. There were a couple of platforms set up, and people were already gathering. Medaby walked off on his own, and I looked around for Icky and his family, but my eyes found Henry instead. As cliché as it sounds, for a moment I found my thoughts delightfully quiet as all my concerns drifted to the background. If safety and comfort had a shape, It would come in the form of a young man with an undercut and a smile so warm it melted the icy cage around my heart. He waved and ran up to us, tripping on his apron but regaining his balance practically immediately, and grinned widely as he came to a halt in front of my wheelchair. "Hey, Sas! Hey, Snow!" Snow gave him a firm nod, and I looked him up and down. "You're wearing your uniform. You're not skipping work, are you?" I inquired with a soft laugh. Henry chuckled awkwardly. You know," he grinned. "I can't be expected to work today with a big row battle tournament going on." I laughed softly and shook my head, but couldn't keep myself from smiling. "Of course, as long as you don't get fired." Henry laughed and scratched his neck. "Nah, I doubt the boss would do that to me. I've missed work with worse excuses." We laughed along with him, but after a moment, Henry gave me a scrutinizing look. "Are you feeling okay, Sas? You look tired." I smiled apologetically. I'm always tired, but yeah. I'm a little anxious about all those row battles. I don't know if I'll be able to stand for all that time, or if I'll have enough energy. And there are a lot of people here, and... Hey, Henry soothed. How about instead you just focus on having fun? That's why you're here, right? I nodded reluctantly. Yeah, that is right, and truth be told, I don't really care whether we would... Truth be told, I don't really care whether we win or lose, but... I sighed. Oh, never mind. It's almost time for our first match. Before we could get going, Henry placed his hand on top of mine. "Hey," he said, "you'll do great. I'll be cheering you on." Despite everything, I couldn't help but smile. "Thanks, Hen." Henry promised me he'd watch my chair as Snow helped me stand up. I took a few deep breaths and flashed him a grateful smile, but as soon as I turned my back, I sighed. "Oh, Snow," I muttered. "I don't understand why I have to be so scared all the time." Snow squeezed my hand gently, but she didn't have an answer for me. I readied myself for our first match and stood up straight after taking a few deep breaths. Much to my surprise, our opponents were familiar to me. I smiled and waved. "Hello, Samantha." Samantha grinned and crossed her arms. "Are you ready to lose?" she sneered, and I chuckled. "Oh, is that how we're going to play this?" I smiled, finding some confidence returning as I rested my focus on the row battle at hand. All the people watching us suddenly didn't seem to matter so much anymore. It was time to row battle. "Men and fighters ready?" Mr. Referee called, and I nodded. Snow shuddered with anticipation. Samantha yelled a "Yeah!" and Peppercat lashed her tail, eager to get started. "All right, MEDABOTS, row battle!" "Snow!" I shouted, and she knew exactly what to do. Our usual opening strategy worked perfectly for this scenario, and Snow shot forward, lashing at Peppercat and leaping right back to her original position. Peppercat had managed to catch most of the blow with her arm. Samantha clenched her hands to fists as her MEDABOTS chimed. "Warning! Left arm damaged. 30% damage." "Okay, Peppercat, our turn!" she shouted soon after. "Tackle and shock!" Peppercat, too, knew exactly what to do. Her communication with Samantha was fluid and clear. She, too, knew her metafighter very well. They had fought and won many of her battles together. Peppercat launched herself forward, her feline build aiding her agility. "Up!" I shouted for Snow, and my Medabot leapt into the air right as Peppercat pounced. "Jump!" Samantha ordered without breaking a sweat, and Peppercat obeyed, trying to grab a hold of Snow as she charged her shock attack. "Get out of range!" I said, and Snow spun mid-air, gracefully landing a somersault to get away from Peppercat. Samantha grit her teeth. Snow and Peppercat danced across the battlefield, each trying to get behind the other to land a hit. Peppercat was relatively able to keep up with Snow in speed and agility, which was most impressive. I couldn't help but wonder briefly what an unstoppable force we might be if we fought alongside one another. An idea for another day, I soon realized, because we were at a standstill. Neither Medabot was fast enough to best the other. They traded blows, but if we kept going this way, it would wear Snow out way too much. "Time for a new trick," I muttered into the Medawatch. "Use your blizzard, anchor her down." Snow didn't need to be told twice and leapt up immediately, slashing her claws. Peppercat got ready to jump after Snow, but Samantha shouted for her. "Wait! Run away!" "Run?" Peppercat was confused for a moment, but then wind and ice gathered between the white Medabot's claws. Snow summoned her blizzard attack and sicked it on Peppercat, freezing the red Medabot to the ground. "Now!" I shouted, and Snow shot down, then, with another graceful leap, found herself behind Peppercat. "Warning! Warning!" Samantha's Medawatch chimed, but she could only watch as my Medabot jammed her claws into Peppercat's back again and again, until Peppercat slumped over and ejected her medal. "And the winner is Snow!" Mr. Effrey exclaimed, and the crowd cheered. I breathed out a sigh of relief, and Snow darted to my side to support me. "You did great!" we exclaimed at the same time, and then we both laughed. "Peppercat!" Samantha shouted, running up to her Medabot and reinserting her medal. Peppercat blinked a few times. "What just happened?" she asked, confused. "One moment I was stuck, and the next I was out." Samantha sighed and tried to pry Peppercat away from the ice, but her Medabot was stuck. "You did good, Pep," she muttered. "I wanted to win, but it was fun while it lasted." I walked up to the two of them with the help of Snow. "Hey, you two did amazing," I said, and Samantha turned to look at me. "Huh?" I smiled and gestured for Snow to break Peppercat free from the ice. My Medabot shattered her frozen trap with her strong claws and helped Peppercat escape the icy prison. "It was a fun row battle. You put up a fantastic fight. Not many Medabots can match Snow's speed and agility." I smiled. Samantha was taken aback for a moment, but then she grinned. "Yeah, thanks. You were pretty good too, I guess." I laughed and gave her an appreciative nod. "Boss, boss!" Spike and Sloane shouted, climbing the podium. "You were totally awesome, boss!" Sloane exclaimed. "Yeah, you really know how to lose, boss!" Spike added. "What was that, Spike?" Samantha growled, and Spike jumped. Not like that, boss! Boss, wait! Boss!" I chuckled softly and shook my head, watching the screws run after one another and off the podium. "Energetic bunch," Snow noted, and I laughed lightly as she helped me down the stairs. "You did it, Saskia!" Henry cheered, and I couldn't help but grin. He was there with Eureka and Karen, the latter helping the former take pictures and videos. Brass and Neutronurse were there to resist as well. I smiled at them as Snow and Henry helped me sit back down in my wheelchair. Eureka ran up to me with her camera and microphone, shoving Henry out of the way as soon as I was seated. "That was amazing! I got pictures of the whole thing. Can I write about you in the school paper? You were the first person to ever beat Samantha. Well, after Icky, but he used a fountain, so it doesn't count. Please, Saskia, please!" she exclaimed, her enthusiasm second to none. I felt a little overwhelmed because everyone was looking at me, but I gave her a gentle nod. "Of course, Eureka," I smiled. "As long as you give me a copy of your article, I would love to read it." Eureka beamed. "Yes, ma'am. I think you're a serious contender for winning the tournament, that's why." I smiled and opened my mouth to thank her when Mr. Effrey announced the victor of a row battle on one of the other podiums. "And the winner is Medaby!" I frowned softly. "How are they doing?" I asked softly, and Eureka shrugged. "They've just been ignoring each other," Karen whispered, and the dejection in her voice broke my heart. "They'll be fine," Henry said reassuringly, and I nodded slowly. "I sure hope so." "Karen!" Someone then shouted and snapped us all out of our concerns. "Karen, I won my match! We defeated Femjet, the defending champion!" I smiled as Koji came running up to us, having finished his first round of row battles. Karen clasped her hands together in front of her chest. "Oh, Koji, that's wonderful!" Koji smirked, and his Medabot Smilodon caught up to him. I was glad to see they both appeared to be doing well after their encounter with the Gimme Ghost. Snow and I took a good look at Koji's Medabot. This was the first time we'd seen him. He looked to be light on his feet, but his weapon suggested he packed quite a punch as well. A strong opponent. I wondered if we'd get to face him, and one look at Snow confirmed to me that she wanted nothing more than just that. I was just about to tell Snow how exciting this was when somebody else joined us. "Hey kids, having fun?" a familiar voice inquired. I looked up to find Coach Mountain towering over us, carrying a beat-up Digmole under his arm. "Coach Mountain!" Eureka exclaimed in surprise and raised her camera to snap a picture. "What are you doing here?" The coach looked down at Digmole. Well, we just wanted to try our hand at a row battle tournament because we thought it would be fun. Instead, I didn't really know what to say or do, and so we just lost." The coach looked dejected, but Digmole nudged him with his arm. No, Coach, I had fun. Really, I like row battling with you. It doesn't really matter to me if we win or lose," he said earnestly. The coach sniffled, moved by his dear companion. "Ah, Digmole, I had fun too, buddy." His eyes brimmed with tears. I observed with a gentle smile, but then Icky came walking up as well. He appeared lost in his own thoughts, his eyes cast down. I frowned softly. "Hey, Icky, everything okay?" Henry asked kindly, but Icky just shrugged and didn't answer. I had never seen him so disheartened. Icky was always upbeat and energetic. I didn't really know what to do to help him, and that pained me. "Should we go check on Medaby?" I asked carefully, but Icky shook his head. "Nah, you have a row battle coming up. And besides, he's my Medabot. I should be the one to go check on him." I nodded. "Good. I'm proud of you, Icky." Icky nodded. Icky looked at me from over his shoulder, and the complicated expression on his face broke my heart. He turned away again without saying anything and walked off. I breathed out a quiet sigh. Our next match was against an older gentleman and his Sam-type Medabot, a dual-wielding samurai. Erika had informed me a little bit up front. Apparently, this man was their principal, and his Medabot was the only one allowed at school. Samurai supposedly had a supernatural ability of sorts that allowed him to know exactly when and where students were up to mischief. I wasn't sure how much of that was true, but at the very least, this Medabot and his Medafighter seemed to have a decent amount of experience row battling. I exchanged glances with Snow, who gave me a confident nod. "We can do this," she conveyed to me wordlessly, and I smiled back at her. "Let's." "Medafighters ready?" Mr. Effrey called out, and I took a deep breath before giving him a nod. "Oh dear, I suppose so," the principal said with a sweet smile. "All right, Medabots, row battle!" As soon as Mr. Referee gave the signal, Snow shot forward and at Samurai, getting her first attack in and leaping back again in the blink of an eye. I couldn't keep a confident smile from tugging at my lips, but it faded again as soon as I realized Samurai had only sustained minimal damage. "His armor is deceptively thick," Snow said, and I nodded. Right, we'll have to find a way around that," I replied, quickly rethinking our strategy. Perhaps... But the principal and Samurai weren't going to stand around and wait for me to come up with a plan. "Keep out of his range for now," I ordered quickly as Samurai charged at Snow, swords drawn. "I need some time to think." Snow nodded and ran across the battlefield. Samurai's armor was thick, but that also made it quite heavy. He didn't look like a tank, but he sure was one. Keeping out of the range of his swords wasn't a problem for light and agile Snow. She was so quick on her feet that Samurai had no way of reaching nor attacking her. Thankfully, that gave me the luxury to take some time to switch gears and think, but I knew Snow couldn't keep running forever. My Snow was a glass cannon made for speed, to overwhelm her opponents before they knew what had hit them, but unable to absorb many hits herself. She wasn't built for the long game, while Samurai was. His build was heavy, which meant he could strike with a lot of force and at the same time absorb a lot of hits. This matchup was looking to be deceptively difficult. Of course, Snow could easily evade him, but ultimately Samurai would outlast her, and if she gave him even the slightest opportunity, one good blow from Samurai might very well be enough to take her out completely. The approach Snow and I normally use to handle tanks would be very risky to try on Samurai. Ordinarily, we'd chip away at them, perhaps freeze their weapons or their feet to immobilize them, and then strike at any weak spots. But Samurai's unique shape would allow him to use his weight to break through the ice. Because tanks were usually much wider and bottom-heavy, once they were stuck in the ice, they had a hard time getting loose, but I could easily see Samurai throwing his weight around to break his limbs free, and more importantly, he'd punish us severely if we let Snow in range of his weapons. "No need to rush, Samurai," the principal ordered, confirming to me that they indeed would be going for a stalling strategy. You won't catch her now anyway. Don't waste your energy. Wait for her to come to you." Both Snow and Samurai came to a stalemate. Neither moved to attack, each observing the other and waiting for orders, loaded with anticipation. The crowd held its breath. "We need more force behind our attacks if we are to penetrate that armor," I muttered out loud. Then at last a plan began to take shape in my mind. Samurai used his weight to generate force, but there was another important factor. Freeze to ground, I said, and Snow would have grinned if she could. She knew exactly what I was thinking, and slashed her claws to summon a blizzard. Be careful, don't get frozen, the principal exclaimed, but Samurai wouldn't have had time to get out of the way regardless. Within seconds, the whole podium was covered in ice. More importantly, Snow had disappeared in the blink of an eye. What? Samurai exclaimed, looking around frantically to locate my Medabot, only to realize she was gliding across the frozen ground like an ice skater. The ice aided Snow in building up momentum. She sped across it, graceful as a gazelle, and made laps around Samurai. This was a strategy we didn't get to use very often, but every now and then it came in mighty handy. We'd never used it on a tank-like Medabot before. Instead, this usually helped with outspeeding faster opponents, but right now it was the perfect fit for the row battle at hand. After all, Samurai wouldn't be able to damage Snow if she was far too quick for him to hit. Go ahead, attack, I ordered Snow, and she changed direction whilst maintaining her speed, striking at Samurai's back and then leaping out of his reach again. This time, I saw small cracks form at the point of impact. Yes, I breathed. Keep it up. Snow kept going round and round, circling Samurai like a vulture and striking with growing force each time. She chipped away at his armour. Cracks were beginning to form. Uh-oh, what's this? Said the principal, adjusting his small round glasses. Stand your ground, Samurai. You know what to do. Samurai nodded and widened his stance, lowering his centre of gravity. The next time Snow came at him, Samurai was ready for her. The red Medabot gripped his swords and lifted them as Snow came charging at him. He struck, and as soon as she dove at him, and I gasped in shock as his swords made contact with her leg parts and sent her flying. Warning, damage, my Medawatch chimed, and I held my breath, watching with wide eyes as Snow crashed into the floor, slid across the ice, and slowly came to a halt. Legs damaged, 100% damage. Function ceased. Snow couldn't get up. The principal gave Samurai a nod. Careful not to slip on the ice, the red Medabot trudged up to Snow and lifted both his swords. I could only watch with bated breath. No, this row battle isn't over yet. I can't let this happen. Then, in the nick of time, a risky idea entered my mind. Snow, I shouted. Use the blizzard on yourself. Everyone who had heard me exclaimed in surprise, but Snow did as I asked without a second thought. She slashed her claws and Samurai stepped back to get out of her range, but Snow wasn't aiming at him. Snow held the blizzard between her claws and kept feeding the storm whilst keeping it as contained as she could. She kept building and building the pressure. Ice particles and wind strained against her until suddenly they burst out and froze. A huge, spiky tower of ice shot up from where Snow had been lying, and the audience gasped at the impressive sight. The ice glistened in the sunlight, shining bright blue, and Snow was frozen in its centre. What? The principal muttered, blinking as he looked up. She's inside, Samurai exclaimed. Our opponents were dumbfounded for a moment. But then Samurai began to use his swords to hack away at the ice to get the Snow. Her ice was thick, but it wouldn't hold out forever. Snow, do you copy? Are you okay? I exclaimed, and then I breathed out a sigh of relief once she answered. Yes, I left myself some space. She sounded so triumphant it put my mind at ease. For now, at least, Snow was safe from further damage. Okay, do you think you could get to the top? I asked. Affirmative, Snow said. Preferably without drawing too much attention to yourself, I murmured before she could make a move. Pretend you're stuck for a moment. Snow followed my orders, and to my delight, Samurai and the principal assumed that Snow was stuck and focused on breaking the ice on ground level. I want you to get to the top as quickly as you can, I said, and Snow chuckled ominously, having guessed my plans. She was shuddering with anticipation as she jammed her claws into the ice and used them to scale the wall from within. Her spikes aided her like built-in ice axes. Within seconds, she was at the top. I couldn't help but feel incredibly impressed. I couldn't even begin to imagine how much effort scaling a wall would cost, especially when she couldn't use her legs. But my Snow wasn't just any Medabot. She was capable of the extraordinary. Snow burst out the top. Ice shards came falling down and flickered in the sunlight. Gasps and exclamations of surprise sounded from the crowd, and the principal could only watch and hold his breath. Samurai looked up as he heard the cracking and took a step back to get a better look, but slipped on the ice and fell on his back. "Now!" I shouted, but I didn't even have to. Snow flung herself off her tower and came crashing from the heavens like a lightning bolt. She extended her arm and threw all her weight into the strike. "Samurai!" the principal shouted, but it was too late. Snow crashed into the red Medabot, and her claws broke clean through his armor, splitting his metal plating. Samurai sparked and jolted, but then ejected his medal. Everything was awfully quiet for a moment, but then Mr. Referee's voice rang clear. "Function ceased! The winner is Snow!" The crowd erupted with cheering, and I breathed out a sigh of relief. Snow drew her arm back, but couldn't stand, let alone walk, so she clumsily sat down next to Samurai. Now that we had won, I could really feel my exhaustion taking hold. The excitement of the row battle had sufficiently distracted me, but now that the adrenaline subsided, I felt my energy dwindling. I had given everything I had. The noise and the many people around us hit me all at once, and I could feel my heart was having a difficult time keeping up with all that standing. I noticed I was out of breath, even if I hadn't moved much. My legs were complaining as well, and I wasn't sure how much more I could take. That realization filled me with many an emotion, but frustration led the pack. "No, I'm not done yet! We have more row battles to fight!" I wanted to do more, focus more, win more, show that I still had a fight left in me, prove my body wrong, as it were. "Saskia?" Snow's voice came through the Medawatch and snapped me out of my thoughts. I looked up and realized she couldn't get up by herself. The principal had already reinserted Samurai's medal and helped his Medabot back up. I carefully stepped onto the ice. "Saskia, don't." The worry in Snow's voice upset me. "I'm fine, Snow," I told her. "I'm okay." But instead of waiting for me to make my way over to her, she allowed Samurai to help her back up. I halted, and then I watched. I watched as Samurai supported Snow as they walked off the stage. I clenched my fists. That should be me, I thought. Why can't I even help my own Medabot? My gaze was still locked on Snow as she sat down with the kids and their Medabots. Neutrino stepped forward to help Snow recover with her healing abilities. I breathed out a soft sigh, carefully making my way across the ice and down the stairs. As soon as I stepped off the platform, Henry met me with the biggest smile on his face. "Saskia, that was incredible!" he exclaimed. "You and Snow were amazing! I have never seen anything like that! That was insanely cool!" He spread his arms invitingly, and though I really did not like physical touch, I was feeling so drained that I wanted nothing more than for him to shield me from the world and all its noise. I moved closer and hugged him, burying my face in his shoulder. The smile on Henry's face made place for concern as he carefully lowered his arms around me. "Hey, do you want to go home?" he asked softly. "No," I said quickly, too quickly. I sighed and shook my head instinctively, but flinched at the sharp headache it came with. "No," I muttered, quieter this time. I was leaning heavily on him, too heavily. But Henry was strong, so he didn't budge, and neither did he seem to mind. Or perhaps I was just weak and had a tainted frame of reference. "Let's get you to your chair," he said gently, and part of me hated how carefully he held me, like I might break if he didn't use the utmost caution. Perhaps I was just angry at myself, at my own body, for needing such care. I didn't want to be like this. I wanted to be normal. Henry helped me sit down in my wheelchair as he slowly broke away from me. I felt myself longing for more of his touch. Something about it felt so pleasant, and it took me a few moments to figure out why. It wasn't painful. Everything was painful, and everything induced pain. Such was my reality. Touching especially could really, really hurt. But I realized by now but I realized by how light and soft he was being, he wasn't exerting enough force to hurt me. Another part of me then adored his attentive nature and the consideration he always offered me. Realizing that, had my thoughts quiet for a moment. Snow then came walking up to me, having recovered sufficiently and enough to stand. "Are you doing okay, Snow?" I asked softly, and she gave me a nod, though the tone of her voice was complicated. "Yes, but you're not." "No, I am," I stated boldly. "I just need a moment to recover, that's all." Snow and Henry shared a moment of brief eye contact. With our defeat of Samurai and the principal, we had made it to the semi-finals. I breathed slowly and deeply as Snow held me up the steps for the umpteenth time, and despite her own reluctance, I grit my teeth against a sinking feeling in my chest and the sharp headache. I was seeing stars, but I held fast onto only one line of thought. I cannot let Snow down. She's been looking forward to this all week. We have to fight. We have to win. We were up against Koji and his Medabot Similidon. Ever since Medabi had told us about how strong that pair was, Snow had been beyond eager to go head-to-head against the two of them. I too was very curious about them and wanted nothing more than to have a good row battle with them. They took their place on the stage as well. "Meta fighters ready?" I took a deep breath. "All right, Medabots, row battle!" Snow dashed forward with even more vigor than before. She was determined to finish this fight quickly for my sake, but before she could get a hit in on Similidon, she had to leap back and avoid his strike. The two of them traded a few hits, but they were mostly concerned with avoiding the other. I bit my lip as I took a moment to observe, tensing up. Unlike our previous opponents, Koji and Similidon had had the opportunity to watch at least one of our row battles. They were ready for us, and seemed at least relatively familiar with our strategies and fighting style right off the bat. Not only that, but Similidon was able to keep up with Snow in terms of speed and agility, much more so than Peppercat. His build indeed was very similar to Snow's, and an extremely fast hard hitter. However, Similidon seemed to have traded in just a little bit of his deftness for armor. That meant he was able to hit harder and absorb more damage. I observed all of this and came to a conclusion. We were at an extreme disadvantage. In every aspect, Koji and Similidon had us either matched or beat. We had to turn the tide in our favor quickly, because Snow wouldn't hold out long otherwise. "Blizzard at the ground, let's try to outspeed," I said, though as Snow executed her maneuver, I tried to think another step ahead. Koji and Similidon had watched our match against Samurai and would surely know what we were planning. Moreover, they'd have had time to think about how to counter. It didn't surprise me then, when I heard Koji shout to Similidon and watched his Medabot hit at the ice with his hammer arm. The ice shattered very easily. Too easily. I narrowed my eyes and saw something glowing on Similidon's head part. My eyes widened in shock as I realized what he was doing. "Snow, they're using a disruptor to maximize the shockwave of Similidon's hits," I exclaimed. "Okay," Snow said, leaping out of the way of her ice shards with ease. "So what do we do?" "More ice," I said without hesitation, but found myself in need of breath, making it difficult to speak the words. "Let them hit at it. Make the terrain as hard to navigate as possible." I let out a slow, deep sigh and tried to steady my respiration. "You will always have the advantage on ice over the flat ground, be that additional speed or easier traversing than the opponent, if you can free Similidon to the ground, but that's not a priority right now." Snow nodded and followed up by doing exactly what I had said. I could always rely on her to execute whatever crazy plans I came up with without a second thought, and that helped me keep my cool. Within seconds, the stage was covered in spikes and icicles. Similidon was still free, but had a hard time moving around, which was exactly what I had been hoping for. "All right, Snow. No time to lose. Use the terrain both for offense and defense. Hide and strike, and quickly. Don't give them time to recover. I panted. My heart was drumming inside my chest. My heart was drumming loudly inside my chest, and my vision blurred. I blinked a few times, rubbing my eyes. Snow shot out from behind an ice pillar, struck Similidon's back, and disappeared behind another. Her coloration and texture served to camouflage her into her surroundings. Koji grit his teeth as his MEDABOTS chimed a warning. Similidon, stand against a pillar, cover your back and stand by. Similidon quickly found a more defensible position and raised his claws, ready to counter. I had to give it to the pair. They were flexible and steadfast. I realized I had to give Snow instructions on what angle to best attack from because I could oversee the terrain from where I was standing. But just as I raised my MEDABOTS to speak into it, I felt dizziness suddenly overtake me. My hands and arms were shaking. In fact, I was trembling all over. Sit down. I have to sit down. I inhaled slowly, trying to steady my breathing, and slowly tried to lower myself onto the ground. Instead, I stumbled and almost fell, but managed without hurting myself too much. I pulled my legs up to my chest and focused on my breathing for a moment, trying very hard not to pass out. I hadn't realized how much I'd pushed myself, but my body had had enough and was demanding its toll. Saskia! Snow exclaimed and came and rushed out from behind her hiding spot. I looked up and saw her coming towards me. No! Focus on the row battle! I ordered, and she hesitated, freezing in place. Now! Koji ordered, and in the blink of an eye, Similidon charged and collided with Snow, first jamming his claws into her back, and then hitting her head part with his hammer arm. Snow hissed and retaliated immediately. Turning around, she forced her claws into Similidon's visor and then kicked him, which made the yellow bot let go and leap back. But Snow launched herself at him again immediately, slashing at him. Her single eye blazed. She was furious. Similidon staggered back and slipped on the ice. Snow was on top of him in an instant and rammed her claws into his torso. She threw all her frustration and grief over me into her strikes, taking out her emotions on Similidon with a shout. Koji strained to see what was going on the other side of the ice, but cringed at the amount of damage his MEDABOTS was listing off. Quickly, Similidon, she's frail! Use your hammer arm! Snow, I whispered as my MEDABOTS buzzed, my head pounding, but it wasn't my MEDABOT I found beside me. Henry had seen me sit down and came running up to make sure I was okay. He knelt beside me and asked worried questions, but between the crowd cheering and the clamour of the row battle, I could not comprehend what he was saying. I narrowed my eyes, trying to see past him, and watched the row battle, but the sunlight reflected off the ice left me completely disoriented. It was too bright. My eyes stung. My chest felt heavy. In all her emotion, Snow wasn't thinking anymore and left herself wide open. Similidon managed to hit her off, and she landed on her back. Her spike stuck into the ice and kept her in place. Similidon lifted his arm and with a few more blows, Snow slumped down and ejected her medal. And the winner is Similidon! That's it! I can't take it anymore! Medaby, who had been watching from the sidelines with clenched fists, shouted and climbed up the stage, clambering up the ice and sliding down every other step, but finding Snow's medal and rushing over to her tin pet, inserting it back. Snow! He yelled as she powered up again. How dare you! Snow cried out to Similidon, enraged. You're lucky I'm stuck! Similidon took a step back. I was following orders! Koji came running over the ice, though careful not to slip. Similidon! He exclaimed, excited. We won! Hey, you, cheap shot! Medaby yelled, leaping up and pointing at him. What's your problem, attacking when Saskia's down? Koji opened his mouth to protest, but then looked over at me and turned pale. I didn't know, he exclaimed quickly, raising his hands. Get me up! Get me up now! Snow demanded, and Medaby grabbed her arms, pulling her out of the ice. Similidon took another step back, but she ignored him and rushed down the slope as quickly as she could, nearly slipping on her way over to me. Saskia, hey, take a deep breath. Can you do that for me? Henry spoke softly. I held onto his hand, though I had little strength, and breathed out slowly. Very good, he said. Mr. Referee and a couple concerned bystanders came up to us as well, but then Snow flung herself between them. Give her space, she yelled, and pointed her claws. That shocked them, and they stepped away. But they still kept looking. I'm fine, I growled. I'm fine. I hated the fuss, the concern on all those faces. Snow looked at me from over her shoulder. Wheelchair, now, she ordered, and Henry gave her a nod. Can I pick you up? He asked softly, and I sighed dramatically. Do whatever you want. I can't resist now anyway. Henry paused, a horrified look on his face. What? Forget it, I grumbled and tried to get up by myself, but my head stung, and pain seared through my muscles. Henry, now, Snow said, and he took a deep breath. I'm sorry, he said as he carefully wrapped his arms around me. If there's anything I do that you don't like, let me know immediately. My head was swimming. I barely understood the words. Henry carried me down to my wheelchair and sat me down. Snow sparked and her movements were jolted, but her concern over me kept her going. We're going for a walk, she told the others, her voice stern and eye blazing, daring anyone to challenge her. Medaby nodded, and Snow led the way. Her intensity parted the crowd like the Red Sea. Henry followed quietly, pushing my wheelchair. After we had gotten away from the crowd and to a quieter spot, a grassy hill underneath an oak tree, Snow halted. I took a shaky breath as she turned around to face me and immediately broke down crying. Snow moved closer, and I hugged her tightly, sobbing. Henry frowned, but didn't say anything. I'm sorry, Snow, I whimpered. I'm so sorry. Snow sighed softly, her relief apparent in her voice. It's okay now, Saskia. You're okay, she soothed. I sniffled. Oh, Snow. I had a hard time facing Henry, but after a moment I looked up at him from over my shoulder. His distressed expression broke my heart. Henry, I whispered, and he moved to stand on my side so I wouldn't have to strain to look at him. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare you. I'm sorry. He shook his head slowly. No, Sas, it's okay. I promise you're okay. I'm just glad you're all right. I bit my lip, tears stinging in my eyes, and looked away. I just want to be okay. I don't think I've ever been, but it's been nothing but downhill the past couple years. I don't know what to do anymore. Snow placed her hand on mine. You can start by letting us help you when you need it. I sighed and looked away. I don't want to need help. But you do need it, Snow said softly. I swallowed thickly. My hands were shaking. Henry took a step closer and I rested my head against his forearm. He blushed darkly and froze completely, but I didn't notice, too focused on Snow. You don't have to like it, she said softly, but you can't do as much as you used to. I frowned. It's not fair. Henry shook his head slowly and looked down at me. No, it's not, he said softly, and I glanced up at him. It's not fair at all. None of it is, and it sucks. It sucks a lot. But you're not alone in this, Saskia. Snow nodded. He's right. I sighed and relented. Yeah, I get so angry and scared and ashamed all at the same time. Henry moved his fingers slightly. They brushed against my hair. I closed my eyes for a moment and breathed out. Henry noticed. May I? He asked softly, and I nodded absent-mindedly. Henry carefully pulled his arm away, and I rested my head against his side instead. He, and very carefully at that, placed his hand on my hair and ran his fingers through my curl slowly. I closed my eyes. Ordinarily, I hated it when other people touched my hair. They were always too rough or got their fingers tangled, but Henry's touch was very light and gentle, and I found I didn't mind it so much when he did it. It felt nice, even. My heartbeat slowed, and I felt my thoughts quiet for a moment. I didn't feel so scared when he was near. After a while, we left the comfortable shade of the oak tree and went back to the city square. It started to rain, but the gloomy atmosphere that met us weighed far heavier. Icky was crying, and on his knees, Medaby sat lifeless on the stage. Erika, Karen, and the Screws were with them, along with Coach Mountain and their MEDABOTS, looking for something. Everyone else had left. "Hey guys, what's wrong?" Henry called out. "Medaby's medal is gone!" Icky replied, and I felt my heart drop. "No." Henry ran over and began looking with the children. Before I could feel utterly useless again, Snow positioned my wheelchair somewhere I could observe the whole scene from. "Direct me like you would in a row battle," she told me, and I gave her a nod. "All right." I looked over their search and kept track of where everyone had been, keeping an eye out for potential and plausible places where Medaby's medal might have rolled off to. I couldn't help but worry for poor Medaby. After hours of searching in the rain, it became clear that Medaby's medal was nowhere to be found. I began to suspect that the reason it wasn't there anymore couldn't be an accident, but before I could say something, Henry came walking up to me. His expression was grave. I lifted my face to look at him, my wet hair clinging to my cheeks and raindrops dripping down my forehead. "I need to tell you something, Sus," Henry said quietly, just loud enough for me to hear. He ran his hand across his forehead. Medaby's medal is a rare one. That means it holds extreme potential and great power. If whoever has a hold of it now manages to..." He shook his head, droplets flying from his hair. "We could be in a world of trouble, is what I'm trying to say." I shivered. "Whoever has it?" Henry sighed and looked back at Icky from over his shoulder. "We would have found it by now if it was still here. Look, I'm gonna search for it all night. If anybody's stolen it, odds are it's the rubber robos. They may have realized Medaby's medal has unusual power during our encounter with the Gimme Ghost." I nodded quietly, taking all this information in. Henry took a deep breath and looked out across the skyline. "I'll take you home if you'd like." He offered, and I gave him a nod. There was nothing more to be done. Both Snow and Henry were awfully quiet as we made our way home. I didn't say anything either, lost in thoughts and concern over poor Medaby. Eventually, we reached my house, and I looked back at Henry as he made room for Snow behind the wheelchair. "Will you be okay?" I asked quietly. I didn't want him to leave. Henry gave me a confident smile despite the awful situation. "Of course, don't worry about me. By tomorrow morning, the Phantom Renegade will have Medaby's medals back safe and sound." I smiled a little bit, and that seemed to reassure him. But by the following morning, Henry was nowhere to be found. I texted him a few times, but he hadn't responded or as much as read my messages. Snow and I went to the store he worked at, but only found his disgruntled manager. Eventually, we made our way over to the town square, where the tournament had been held the day prior, but we didn't find him there either. We did find Icky, Erika, Karen, the Screws, and their MEDABOTS there, however. My heart shattered, realizing they had likely been searching all morning. "Hey guys," I spoke, and they turned to look at me. "Hey Saskia," Karen exclaimed, and Snow rolled my wheelchair closer. "Can we help at all?" I asked, and Icky sighed. "We've looked everywhere, but he's just not here." Everyone frowned, but then Erika gasped, "I have an idea!" Soon we found ourselves on Icky's doorstep. Medaby's body sat safely in the hallway, but seeing him so void of life and character cut me to my core. Then Erika came running outside with Icky's dog Salty. I lit up immediately upon seeing him. I loved animals, but dogs especially, with all my heart, and the little Jack Russell was just what my broken spirit needed. "He can track Medaby's medal!" Erika exclaimed, and helped Salty get a good sniff of Medaby's medal compartment. Icky frowned. Won't all the rain have washed the scent away?" I smiled and shook my head. "Dogs have remarkable noses and an incredibly keen sense of smell," I said. "If he can track it, he will." As if on cue, Salty barked and sprinted off. The kids gasped and ran after him. Snow quickly turned my wheelchair around, and alongside the other MEDABOTS, we rushed off. After a few moments, we managed to catch up to them. Salty had slowed his pace, but with his nose stuck to the ground, he kept a steady tempo. Icky and Erika walked up front with Salty, followed by the Screws, and Karen kept me company by walking next to my wheelchair. I'd realized one of the children was missing. "What about Koji?" I asked tenderly. "Won't he come help?" Karen smiled. He said he's busy repairing some Melodon, but I've seen his butlers around town asking around for Medaby's medal. Just don't tell Icky. I think Koji doesn't want him to know he cares. But I know he's been feeling kind of guilty since yesterday. Not just about his match with Icky, but about yours as well." A smile found its way onto my face. "Say, Karen, when you next see him, would you congratulate him on winning the tournament for me?" Karen gave me a pleasant nod. "Of course." It truly was a challenging row battle. I mused, and Snow nodded. "I certainly wouldn't mind a rematch, and I do want to apologize to Similidon for yelling at him earlier." Karen smiled kindly. "I'm sure they'll understand." I opened my mouth to say something else when the rest of the group suddenly came to a halt. I furrowed my brow and looked ahead, only to find we'd come to a giant warehouse. It looked to be abandoned. "See, I knew it," Icky sighed. "He's not here." I narrowed my eyes, anxiety creeping its way into the back of my mind. I didn't really know why, but everything just felt a little too quiet. "Hey, what are you kids doing here?" I nearly jumped out of my skin. I recognized that voice immediately. "The Rubberobos, they're back." Within an instant, we were surrounded. My eyes widened in shock when I realized there were many, many more than the 4 we had encountered in the forest. "Snow!" I shouted, and my Medabot didn't waste a second. She leapt in front of me and raised her claws, ready for whatever they would be throwing our way. Brass, Neutronurse, Cyandok, Totalizer, and Peppercat joined her. But then the Rubberobos sent out their Medabots, and I gasped in surprise. White Sword, Sikaru, Gokudo, and Gobanko. They were back, and this time they weren't caught off guard. Before I could even give directions, Sikaru and Gokudo doubled up on Snow, and White Sword and Gobanko made quick work of Cyandok and Brass. Karen ordered Neutronurse to heal everyone, but before she could retreat to a safe spot, they got to her as well. Samantha and Sloane gritted their teeth, glancing at each other for support in a potential strategy. I hadn't even realized how the other half of the row battle was going, too focused on Sikaru and Gokudo. "Run around, draw their fire, see if you can make them hit each other by accident," I said quickly. Not the greatest strategy I'd ever come up with, but the best I could do in the stressful situation. Snow did as I asked, but Sikaru and Gokudo were battle-hardened and seemed to know each other very well. They worked together like a well-oiled machine. "New plan," I said to Snow, trying very hard to keep my cool as the children beside me panicked. "Can you use your blizzard to—" I was cut off when a Rubberobo placed their hand over my mouth and put the other on my shoulder. I froze and could only watch as White Sword and Gobanko took down Totalizer and Peppercat. Snow turned around and upon seeing me was consumed with fury. "Get away from my Medabiter!" she shouted and launched herself forward to come to my aid, but Sikaru shot her in the back and Gokudo grabbed her. Snow shouted and cut clean through his arms with her claws, only to shoot herself at Sikaru, but the Rubberobo that held me yelled at her. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," he threatened. I recognized him as the leader from our last encounter, Sea-Slug. "If you want your precious Medafighter to see another day, that is, I suggest you cooperate." Snow turned to him with a look so dangerous that I could feel him freeze beside me for a moment. But I gave her a pleading look, and not long after, Snow reluctantly gave in and held up her hands. All the colour drained from my face. We'd been captured. They led us inside and tied us up. I cried out in pain when they dragged me out of my wheelchair and twisted my arms behind my back. Snow looked like she was ready to murder each and every one of them, but remained quiet for my sake. They put us all together into a corner of the warehouse, except for the defeated MEDABOTS. They left their timpets with us, but their medals they put inside a small sack and sat on one of the tables. Snow insisted on staying by my side, and because she promised to be much more of a problem if they tried to separate us, they let her stay with me. I took a deep breath as the gang members began interrogating us. Instead of listening to what they had to say, I was trying to get a good idea of the layout of the warehouse and potential escape routes. I knew Snow would be able to cut our bonds easily, but there were just so many gang members around.
"How did a couple of kids like you find our headquarters?" Seaslug demanded, very angry. "Our real estate agent promised us a top-secret location."
"You have Medabots' medal, don't you?" Erika shouted and Icky gasped.
"Wait, it all makes sense. You guys stole it."
Seaslug and Gilgirl laughed.
"Oh, so that's why you're here. Come to get your precious little Medabot back? Well, there is nothing you can do."
Seaslug taunted, fishing something out of his pocket. My eyes widened as I realized what he was holding.
"Feast your eyes on this," he sneered. "He's ours now, and together we'll wreak more havoc than you can imagine in that tiny little brain of yours."
Suddenly, I remembered something the Phantom Renegade had told me during our last encounter with the Rubber-Robos. None of those Rubber-Robo clowns have a good head on their shoulders, and from the looks of it, you're pretty sharp. We can outwit them together. Outwit them.
"That's not Medabots' medal,"
I stated boldly. Icky, who had gone extremely pale upon realizing it was most definitely his Medabot, looked at me in confusion, but just as he opened his mouth to say something, Erika joined in.
"Yeah, do you think we're stupid?"
she exclaimed, having guessed my plan.
"What?"
Seaslug exclaimed.
No, this is very clearly—"
"Then prove it," Snow said, cutting him off. Seaslug glared down at her.
"What?" "I'll believe you once I hear his voice and see him moving."
Erika grinned.
"If it's really Medabot, that ought to prove it."
"You!" Seaslug scowled and turned around, grabbed the nearest Medabot, which happened to be Siguru, and ripped her medal out.
"Seaslug, don't!"
Shrimplip shrieked, realizing a little too late what we'd been planning. Seaslug slapped Medabots' medal into Siguru's body.
"Whoa, what just happened?"
Medabots' voice came blaring through Siguru's speakers.
"Where's Similodon?" "Look sharp, Smarty Bot!" Erika shouted. "We're in the Rubber-Robo hideout." "Rubber-Robos? Erika, Icky, what's going on here?
I've got a meta headache," Medabot groaned, placing his hand against his head, and then realized he wasn't even in his own body.
"What happened to my beautiful body?" he shouted. "Now I'm really angry. What do you think you're trying to do?"
He turned to Seaslug and aimed his lasers. I may not know what's going on, but you're looking mighty suspicious."
Now, let's not get hasty,"
Seaslug started, but Snow leapt up. "No, let's." She scowled and readied her weapons. "It's time for carnage."
Yeah!
Medabot shouted and began shooting at the Rubber-Robos. Snow flung herself at Seaslug, sharp, cold, and unforgiving as an ice storm.
"That's it! You're going down!"
Gilgirl shrieked and sticked the remaining 3 Medabots on Snow and Medabot. But before the robot could get on the way, the ground began to tremble. I held my breath as the rumble grew louder and looked to the other end of the warehouse, where the sound seemed to be coming from. Suddenly, a forklift truck burst through one of the doors, creating a large escape route before crashing into a stack of crates. For a moment, I was terrified, but then I heard it. A confident, charismatic laugh. Relief flooded me as I watched a figure clad in black, with a cape fluttering behind him, walk through the newly created entrance. His shoes clicked on the concrete floor, and his mask gleamed in the pale fluorescent light. The Rubber-Robos were stunned.
"Who are you?"
Seaslug exclaimed. "Oh, don't you remember me?"
the masked menace mocked. I'd consider it an insult, but I suppose you're just too unintelligent to connect the dots. I am the thief in the night, the prowler in the darkness, and the future owner of all your rare medals. They call me Renegade. Phantom Renegade. I stifled a chuckle, feeling a lot safer with him there. What an entrance. It's you! Seaslug exclaimed, recognizing him now. The reason he hadn't before was because he'd never seen the Phantom in daylight. He'd only ever heard his voice and seen his silhouette in shadows. Get him! A sea of rubber-robos advanced on the Phantom Renegade, but with a confident laugh he jumped up and out of reach. Then rained a dozen smoke bombs on the unsuspecting fiends. Coughing and scuffling was soon the only thing to be heard. Snow realized her chance was now, and she slashed at children's bonds, but before she could get to me, a tall figure appeared beside me through the smoke. I turned to look around and breathed in relief when I realized it was the Phantom. Good to see you again, señorita, he spoke, and I, despite everything, couldn't keep a smile from tugging on my lips. He knelt down beside me. Complaints about me carrying you? He inquired, and I shook my head lightly. None at all. He seized me into his arms and lifted me without breaking a sweat. He'd carried me down the stairs not that long ago, and earlier to my wheelchair, but again I marvelled at his strength. He played the part of an unassuming store clerk turned mysterious vigilante very well. Let's go, he said, as soon as he straightened himself, and Icky nodded, ready to follow him. But what about our MEDABOTS? Eureka exclaimed. The Phantom Renegade looked down at her. I'll get them out next, but first you must get to safety. You two, MEDABOTS, guard them. See that they get out unharmed. Snow gave a nod, and Medaby crossed his arms to explain he didn't take orders from anybody, but Snow's death glare made him obey without a word. Before I knew it, the Phantom had jumped onto a crate, scaled the broken forklift, and climbed onto a raised platform, all whilst carrying me. I clung to him with all my strength, which admittedly was not very much, but I couldn't help but be incredibly impressed. From the top of the platform, we were able to see everything that had transpired down below. The children ran out through the gaping hole in the wall, flanked by Snow and Medaby and Zigaru's body. Most of the rubber-robos were still lost in the smoke cloud, but Seaslug, who Snow had done a number on, saw them. Hey, don't let them leave! He shrieked and got up to run after them, but the Phantom threw a small metal object at his feet and tripped him up. I glanced at his inscrutable mask, impressed with his aim. Thanks to his direction, though, White Sword, Kokudo, and Go Banco now knew where to go. They rushed after the children, but the Phantom wasn't fazed and pulled out yet another gadget from his utility belt. Small orbs that he chucked their way, hitting each Medabot with one. As soon as they made contact, they electrocuted the Medabots, flooring them instantly. Whoa, I muttered without even realizing. The Phantom chuckled quietly to himself, but I still heard it, and it made the small hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Now, where are those medals? He asked, voice low. Did you happen to see? I smiled, glad to be useful for once. They're in the sack on that table nearest to the sack of crates. I heard him smile in his next reply. I knew I could count on you and your keen observation skills. I smirked. Thanks, it's the autism. That got a chuckle out of him. All right then, hold on to me, he said, and I nodded, grabbing the fabric of his cape. I held my breath as he dropped down from the platform. He landed carefully and snatched the bag from the table, stealing a glance inside to ensure the medals were in there, and breathing out in relief when he realized they were. Hey, what are you doing with our medals? Shrimplip shrieked, and I gasped in shock, but the Phantom merely turned around to face him and whatever rubber-robos were still able and willing to fight. Correction, now they're my medals, he stated smugly, holding me steady. Psych, suckers, it's been a blast. How he managed to hold me, the medals, and set off a smoke bomb at the same time, I had no idea, but it took only an instant before we were off again. He ran across the warehouse with me in his arms, and before I knew it, we were outside and well on our way to safety. Snow, come in, I called out to my Medawatch. Where are you? Everything all right? I sighed in relief upon hearing Snow's voice. We're all fine, almost back in town. How about you? We're okay, we've got the medals, I told her, and I would be lying if I said there wasn't a little bit of pride showing through my voice. The Phantom kept on running, carrying me towards a quieter spot underneath a large bridge. Once there, he carefully sat me down and untied my bound wrists and ankles. "Villains," he growled, and only then did I realize how angry the whole affair had made him. "I'm fine," I said softly to reassure him, but he threw the bits of rope away and took off his cape, wrapping it around my shoulders. "You were kidnapped by an evil gang, of course you're not fine," he stated, and I opened my mouth to protest, but realized he was right. I concede," I muttered, and he hugged me. I was a little surprised, but I hugged him back gladly. "Thank God you're safe," he muttered, and I breathed out slowly, hiding my face in his neck. "Thank God you came to help us." Again, I could hear the smile in his voice underneath. I could hear the smile in his voice underneath the mask. "I promise you, I will always come to your rescue."